Today is episode 3 of the Grief Roundtable miniseries. The topic today is forgiveness. If someone you love died at the hands of another, or you've struggled to forgive yourself or someone else you love for the death of your loved one, this episode will bring to the surface the steps needed to forgive and shine the light on the freedom that forgiveness brings for yourself and others. Welcome to the show. This is your host, Teresa Davis. Many times in our losses, we struggle with forgiveness. And I want you to start us off with this, Olga, because you have a unique situation because Pasha was killed in a car accident and he was hit by a drunk driver. And I think forgiveness has many faces, and we're all going to share about our journeys and forgiveness. Sometimes it's even our own self that we can't forgive. It could be a spouse. But Olga, start us off because I know your journey was difficult because his life was taken by a drunk driver.
So I would love to talk about, I think your question about two different forgiveness. First of all, forgiveness to myself as a mom, and forgiveness the person who killed my child. Forgiveness to myself in this moment when Pasha was killed here in the United States. My family and I were 6,000 miles from this place. And we had such a strong bond with our child. And I knew he trusted me with all his heart. And as a mom, for a long period of time, I felt guilty that in the moment when he was dying, I wasn't with him because I thought if I would be there, I would help him. If I would be there, he will not die. What he think about in his, last seconds or minutes his life. Dying in different country around different people who is not even the member of your family, not speaking in your native language. And it took time for myself to forgive myself. And I prayed about it for a long period of time and asked God to show me through his eyes what happened and how it was. And after a couple years, I prayed and had conversation with God and was crying. And he said, I always was with Pasha. Doesn't matter when he was in the hospital or in the moment when crash happened, I always was holding him in my hands. And step by step, moment by moment, when he started to reveal this situation and this scene showed me, I started to trust more and more, and finally I accepted it. And it gave me such a huge relief because I knew no one like God can provide this peace and care, because sometimes our emotions can overwhelm us and we really don't understand the truth. But I gave the situation to God and I accepted that Pasha was all this time with him and he's still with him in his hands. And this is the best care what was possible for him in this moment, in this situation, what happened. And the second, I probably have to tell more about this head-on collision, what happened. Normal day was just completed in the school and rain was a little bit outside. And the boys were supposed to have a soccer practice and coach said it's rain outside right now, so we have to cancel the practice. And Pasha and his friend decided to just get pizza on the way home and finish the project what they worked together. And from the school to the friend house, it was 15 minutes drive. And the driver was a lady from our school. Her name was Dana. She was 41 years old. 3 of her kids were in the car, Pasha and his friend. So they started driving, and someone from other side of the town just made the different choices and used a lot of alcohol, stops couple times, and it was head-on collision. And as a result of this collision, metal of the car ruthlessly was tore off the roof, the doors, and choked the passengers on the left side of the car with the seat belts until seat belts burst. And the force what was pushed on all passengers from the left side was 6,000 pounds. So the lady who was driving, basically the left part of the car was completely destroyed, and it was driver was killed immediately, and then behind the driver was Pasha. And the car was spinning a couple times. He was thrown out of the car, and he was taken in the hospital. And the driver who killed Pasha was 26 years old, and Pasha was his third victim. So the crash happened in March, and then in October we had a trial. And closer to October, I got a call, and the man asked me, "Do you want to talk to this person who killed your child?" And I said, "What should I say?" And it was a couple minutes of pause and then silent. And then he said, "You never know how your words will influence." And I was meditated about these words and prayed. And I took 3 days before I answered. I was praying, fasting, reading Bible, crying. I very often I just closed in my own room, and I really wanted to hear from God what he wants me to do and what he wants me to say. And on the third day, I said, "Okay, God, what do you want me to do? I'm going to obey you, doesn't matter what it will cost me." And he said, "Tell him about my love." And the first reaction was, "What? The person who killed your child in such a horrible car crash, do you want me to talk about your love?" And he said, "Yes, I want you to talk about love, because my love is the same for you and the same for him. This is the same level of love, and you have to forgive him, because it will give you the freedom and move forward. Because if you will not forgive, you will stuck with this unforgiveness for the rest of your life." And in this moment, my youngest kids, I found them, they played with Lego, and they built some kind of castle. And when I asked, "What do you do?" what it is, and they said, "This is the prison for this man who killed our brother. This is the rats around prison, inside, around." And I thought, I don't want to allow my kids to have this forgiveness in their hearts as well. So after all, I was reading a story about prodigal son. And based on this story, I talked to this man who killed our son. I had such a huge peace in my heart. That was a huge mercy and blessing from God. And later, he was crying through all my speech. His mom, who was also in prison before, she was there as well. And later, I made this decision, but I didn't have all these emotions immediately. I cannot say, I said, "Okay, I'm going to forgive him," and never remember about it. It took time, probably around 2 years, but my emotions slowly followed my decisions, what I made to forgive him.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Olga.
This man combined total years what he received. It was given 50 years, because 20 years for Pasha, 20 years for Dana, who was a driver, and then 10 years for one count of intoxication assault. So in his 26 years, he got 50 years in prison. And I am so grateful for this experience, how I learned to forgive him, because looked back, I can see inside of me, inside of my kids, how this decision made the difference in how our family was slowly restored and healed from this horrible car crash.
Wow. That's an incredible story, Olga. And, in its example, when you were talking about the decision that you made, because sometimes we can make that decision with our brain, but it takes a little while for our heart to follow, which you described so perfectly. Thank you so much for sharing that beautiful story of forgiveness. Valerie, I want to talk to you about Nora, because I know you guys had to make a really difficult decision when you were getting some advice. So share with us, have you had to struggle with forgiveness?
Yeah, I don't think I would have maybe called it forgiveness, but I probably, it's in the same realm of just the like, what ifs. Did we make the right choice? Looking back, I know, and my husband would share, he probably struggled more than I did. Just like, did we have all the information? Did we make the best choice? And kind of like Olga, we just pleaded with the Lord. I remember actually we have a ministry at our church that helps just facilitate us to go deep and ask questions and find healing in places in our hearts that are struggling. And that was one of the biggest questions that we were still, needing. And of course, there's the, what do people think of us? Like, which you shouldn't even care about. But the truth is, do they think that we gave up on her? Do they think that there was more we could have done? And my husband is always saying, if there was a doctor on the top of the Himalayas, that would have had this thing that he could have done that would have brought healing, like we would have done it. We did everything that we physically could, but that's what the Lord saw fit. But we asked God, and he just really spoke into those places and healed our hearts, showing us that he was there. He helped us make the decision. He used the doctor in that moment to help us make the best decision possible and give her the best life. And my situation is different in that she never had a whole life here. She just didn't. She brought us such delight, and we thought we would care for her forever. But she is, when I say she's in a better place, I really can believe that, because she couldn't walk. There's so many different things. So for us, like, heaven really is such a healing thing for us, but it definitely wasn't easy. It was just the hardest decision, and to live with that. And when it took her longer to pass than we thought, I think that's really where we were like, oh my gosh, did we make the wrong decision? But yeah, God has really healed those places, but it's taken a long time for that too. So yeah, I don't know what we would have done without him speaking into those places and helping us.
Well, I think that's a testament to you and your husband's relationship, because that kind of decision is not anything a parent ever wants to face. And the fact that you all did it together, allowing the Holy Spirit to lead you, just speaks volumes to your faith. Mm-hmm. Tanya, I'd like for you to share, because I know that there was an element of mental illness that you and Scott had to manage with Trafton. And can you share your story of forgiveness? Did you guys find that to be a struggle?
I think that as a parent, there's always things you wish you could do over. I wish I'd had a second chance to ask a question in a different way, because for several years we didn't know it was mental illness. We just knew that our very bright son was making some very poor choices, and we didn't understand addiction, and those that are mentally ill, a very high percentage will self-medicate, and they're just trying to calm their brains down. And so Scott and I spent a lot of time, once he was diagnosed as bipolar, we went to a class with NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, just to try to understand what he was going through. But it's kind of like each of us. We didn't know what it was like to lose a child until we lost a child. Mm-hmm. And now we had an instant connection with one another because of our loss. Well, I think Trafton, because none of us suffer from mental illness, we couldn't fully understand what he was going through. And so the heartache came from, we can't understand. We didn't know how to help. We learned a lot about the addictive brain. We learned a lot about mental illness. But again, he was a young adult that was of age. He made his own decisions. And no matter what we said or suggested, he didn't have to listen. And when your brain's broken, it's hard to listen. So I think our heartache just came from the fact that we couldn't fix it. And as parents, you want to be able to fix the issue. And with mental illness, you can't. So there wasn't really, I guess, forgiveness and some of the things he said and did. But then you could rationalize that with he wasn't in his right mind when he was lashing out at us. But we had to do some awful things. We had to change the locks on our house, because his target was Scott. But Scott was either his best friend or his worst enemy. And it wasn't Scott. It was mental illness. It was really feel like Satan would use the weakness in him to make it worse as well. So we had to make some really tough decisions. And there were hard nights when he was suicidal and you'd call 911 and there was nothing they could do. Because in all of Austin, he'd say, I'm jumping off a bridge. Well, there's a lot of bridges in Austin. But again, we didn't really fault the police because Austin's big. It's hard to locate someone. But we had to spend a lot of time just saying, God, he's yours. And I know you love him more than we do. That's what we just kept coming back to. He was his child. And I remember Trafton one day saying I said something about his addiction because that's before we knew about the mental illness. He said, Mom, I'm a child of God who suffers from addiction. And he was so right. And I wish, there's a lot of things I wish I could do over.
The testament there I see as a husband and wife making those tough decisions. Nobody really understands that unless they walked in those shoes.
Right.
But I think that, the fact that you guys recognize that it was mental illness, it wasn't really your son, it was the mental illness that had taken over. So that I thank you for sharing that because I know that couldn't be easy to walk that road.
And then there were days where he was himself. That's the hard thing with mental illness, especially bipolar, the highs and lows. Some days he was our son. He was Trafton. He was the young man that we raised. Yeah, so you never knew who you were going to get.
Yeah, and that emotional roller coaster had to be very difficult.
But I can tell you that God continues to allow us to meet other parents that are going through similar situations. And if God can use the yuck we went through for his good, then it's for God's best, not ours.
Well, and I can tell you, Tanya, because with the podcast and even with the While We're Waiting ministry, there are many parents in your shoes. And there are many parents that isolate and don't talk about it because of their feeling like it's their fault. And so putting words to your journey right now will really help that person, that mama out there that feels like she can't talk about it because people won't understand. So to me, that's the big purpose of doing this, is to help people put words to their journey, to be able to relate to somebody that they're not alone, because that's a tough road to toe and it's not as easily to discuss as maybe some other forms of grief. So I appreciate your honesty and your willingness to share about it.
And I just say, call me.
Call me. Yeah. You said that in your video. Call me. Reach out to me. I love that. Well, Jennifer, I want to hear from you because Calvin died in his sleep, and I personally can't imagine what that was like. But tell us about your journey in forgiveness.
Yeah, I mean, there's no one to point to, to say they were responsible, and so self-forgiveness is the issue, and I would say that it's one of the key issues in my journey. I heard somebody really smart say that who you are before loss affects how you experience loss. So what you bring into it with your personality affects how you experience the loss. And so for me personally, I am a super responsible person, bordering on perfectionism for sure. So who is responsible that my healthy son passed away in his sleep. And that's been one of the biggest challenges of the journey, especially at the beginning, because as his mother, I mean, sure, I have a husband who's his father, but I'm his mother and I'm the primary caretaker of this child. And surely there was something that I could have done differently to make this go a different way. And so I sort of have swung on the pendulum of I was in control or God was in control, and back and forth. And where I've been on that pendulum has really dictated how I'm doing from day to day in my walk on this journey. So, thankfully now more days than not, the pendulum is swinging to God is sovereign and he's in control. And I mentioned in my video, just holding really tightly to Psalm 139, that God was the author of his days, and there wasn't anything different that we could have done to change that. When it was his time to go to heaven, it was his time. And so we're holding really tightly to that and just taking it day by day. And it's probably going to be something that I continue to deal with, but thankfully it's like everything else in grief, not as intense as it was before.
Something you said in your video, Jennifer, it just really, kind of stuck out to me. You said, God knew it was going to happen, but I didn't. And that brought you felt a sense of betrayal in that. Tell us about that.
I mean, Eric and I were walking with the Lord when Calvin died. We're serving in pastoral ministry and Christian education, doing everything we could to serve and be close to him, and had a relationship with him. And so it was just really challenging because this came suddenly, out of nowhere, and in no way did we see it coming, but we knew that God knew. And so I think when you have a close relationship with someone, it's easy to feel betrayed. Like, how could this have happened? And you didn't prepare us. And so that's something that I had to deal with early on, but thankfully have worked through that as well. So,
well, and the reason I hope that didn't make you feel on the spot, but the reason I brought that up is because, I've listened to all your stories, and a common thread is a sense of betrayal, especially as moms. I feel like, with our children, not that dad's relationships are different. I just think moms, and you pointed it out, Jennifer, you were the primary caretaker, but I find it's interesting, and Cheryl, we're coming to you next, but I think it's interesting to me, listening to your videos and listening to you gals talk here, is that the number one way that the enemy attacks us as moms is telling us our fault. It's our fault. Mm-hmm. If you could have been there, Jennifer, if you'd have done something different. And I know, Cheryl, you're going to share parts of your story, or Tanya, you've already said, I just feel like there's a common thread there that we could, in all of our stories. And I just feel like if whoever's listening, I hope that you hear that you're fed a lot of lies from the enemy in the very beginning of your grief journey, because you're so overwhelmed with grief. Our minds are so bombarded with so many emotions. It's impossible to be able to differentiate between truth and lies. And we're going to get into community a little later, but I think that one of the most valuable aspects of community is that when you have people walking alongside of you that can help you be a little more rational and help point out things in our life, because it's such an overwhelming experience that you cannot understand unless you've experienced it. So, and these are really raw emotional moments, and I just want to let you guys know how much I appreciate you being willing to share that with us. So, Cheryl, you guys had a situation to where he was, talk to us about your story of forgiveness.
Right. As you shared as moms, we are here to help guide our children. Brenton was 23, not a child, but still living in the home, make wise choices and be protected. Shannon and I had many discussions about Brenton riding a motorcycle at 23. Brenton rode dirt bikes for years. It wasn't the capability. It was more his alertness, his awareness. Florida's busy. I was more concerned with other people not seeing him even as much as his ability on the motorcycle. But when I initially got that call, what immediately went in my mind was, I knew I was going to get this call. My husband and I thought about this, and I wanted to blame. And it's not Shannon's fault. I mean, Shannon loved Brenton dearly, made right decisions for him as well. But in my mind, I wanted to hold on to that, and I didn't protect him. I should have spoke up more. Kind of theory. And I'll be honest with you, after we were home for 3 days and preparing for the service, house is full of people. There's just a lot of emotions. We were out of coffee. My middle daughter was going to go and get coffee, and my vehicle was the last one at the end of the driveway. So I gave her my keys, and Shannon so gently and kindly said to me, "Oh, you're going to loan her your truck." And it flared something in me, guys. Like, I don't know if you had those moments where I looked at him, and because Brenton was on Shannon's motorcycle, and I said, "Will you lend your," and I stopped dead in my tracks. I went in my room, I hit the floor, and I just cried. I'm like, God, I'm going to tear this man up with my words. I'm like, help me, show me, stop me. Those darts you were talking about, Teresa, it's like I just wanted to release the pain I was feeling, but it didn't need to be on Shannon. So as I was in my room just praying, like, God, show up right now. I need you. Show up right now. And 2 Corinthians 2:7 just kept coming to mind. So I opened the Bible like, what? And the verse says, now instead, you ought to forgive and comfort him, or he will be so overwhelmed with grief. Holy cow, guys, like, could God have said it any different? And in my healing process, I learned I didn't need to forgive Shannon. He didn't do anything against me. He didn't do anything against Brenton. But I needed that at that moment, because otherwise I think our marriage would have just shredded. And I'm thankful the Lord stopped my words. He didn't deserve or need that, but that's just where I was at in the early stage of like that blame. And God, I just kept daily giving it to God, and it released, and and it finally lifted. But I had to be, honest with it. It was hard. So that was a piece of forgiveness. And then the driver. But I will say, when we were in the hospital holding Brenton's hand and kind of waiting to see, it was just on my heart that this driver also had went through something tragic that day. I wasn't intentional. He was trying to make a left-hand turn, but somehow ended right in front of Brenton, and they hit head on. No drugs involved. There was no texting involved. But even bedside, my mind kept going to this young person, thinking they've got to be struggling as much as we are. We didn't opt to sue. We had interaction with them, which was hard. And I did still have to work through the forgiveness. But Brenton went on mission trips. And I can remember when he went to Indonesia and he was going on a plane to Dubai, there was something in my heart that I was releasing him to God. Like, Lord, please bring him home safely. But there was this, just as you said, the Lord loves our children more than we do. We think we love them greatly, but there was a release. And on that day, it was almost feeling that same thing, like, God, this didn't catch you off guard. You didn't close your eyes and Brenton suddenly was in a tragedy, but walk me through, because this is far more than I can carry.
Wow, that was a really powerful moment, Cheryl, that you had with the Holy Spirit. I don't know that I would have been able to stop my words. Yeah. So I feel like that was definitely a moment, and you guys were able to work through that, which is a testament to your faith as well, because those are hard moments in our grief journeys, and a lot of folks get derailed in those situations and get stuck and never make it back. So thank you all so much for sharing about those vulnerable places of forgiveness. If you enjoyed today's show, would you share it with someone that needs to hear a message of hope? Subscribe to the show and leave a review, as this will help the podcast reach more of those in need of hope in the midst of grief.